My name is Marcus Thompson, and I thought I had found the perfect job at Davidson Marketing Solutions in downtown Chicago. The glass building on Michigan Avenue looked impressive from the outside, towering 37 floors above the bustling streets filled with morning commuters rushing to catch the red line. During my interview on the 23rd floor, everything seemed legitimate and professional. The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows offering spectacular views of Lake Michigan, and the office space buzzed with the energy of a successful marketing agency. Sarah Davidson, the company owner, promised competitive pay, reasonable hours, and opportunities for growth in the rapidly expanding digital marketing sector. What I didn't realize was that I was walking into a workplace nightmare that would eventually lead to one of the most satisfying legal victories of my life, fundamentally changing not just my career trajectory but my entire understanding of employee rights and workplace advocacy. The red flags started appearing during my second week, subtly at first but becoming increasingly obvious as I learned the unspoken rules of Davidson Marketing's toxic culture. Sarah had this habit of scheduling mandatory weekend meetings without any additional compensation, treating unpaid overtime as if it were a normal expectation rather than a clear violation of federal labor laws. She would send out emails on Friday afternoons around 4:30, casually mentioning that everyone needed to come in Saturday morning at 8 to discuss new client strategies, brainstorm creative campaigns, or conduct team-building exercises that were thinly disguised work sessions. The timing of these announcements was clearly intentional, giving employees no opportunity to make alternative plans or push back against the unreasonable demands. When I raised my hand during one of these meetings and asked about overtime pay, Sarah's expression shifted from friendly to ice-cold in seconds, her smile disappearing as if I had committed some unforgivable social breach. She told me that successful employees understood the importance of going above and beyond for the company, and that questioning policies showed a fundamental lack of commitment to professional excellence and career advancement. Before we continue with this incredible story of workplace manipulation and legal justice, I want to let you know about an amazing opportunity we have for our viewers. We're giving away a brand new motorcycle to one lucky subscriber who likes this video, subscribes to our channel, and comments below telling us where you're watching from. This giveaway is our way of saying thank you for your incredible support and engagement. So make sure you enter by following those simple steps. The winner will be announced in next week's video, so don't miss out on this fantastic opportunity. Chicago winters are brutal, and the gray January sky outside our office windows seem to reflect the increasingly tense atmosphere inside Davidson Marketing Solutions. The bitter cold wind whipped through the downtown canyon of skyscrapers, and employees would arrive at work already exhausted from battling the elements during their morning commute. Sarah had developed a systematic pattern of expecting employees to work unpaid overtime, disguising these illegal demands as team-building exercises, professional development opportunities, or urgent client emergencies that somehow always seemed to occur on weekends. She would organize these elaborate weekend workshops where we would spend 8 to 10 hours discussing marketing strategies, analyzing competitor campaigns, and developing client presentations that could easily be covered during regular business hours throughout the week. The worst part was how she psychologically manipulated anyone who objected, making them feel like they were being unreasonable, uncommitted to the team, or lacking the entrepreneurial spirit necessary for success in the competitive marketing industry. I had moved to Chicago from a small farming town called Greenfield in central Indiana, population barely 3,000, hoping to build a successful career in digital marketing and escape the limited opportunities of rural America. My parents, both factory workers at the local manufacturing plant, had sacrificed enormously to help me get through Indiana University, working double shifts and taking on debt to cover tuition costs that their modest salaries couldn't handle. The pressure to succeed in this job was overwhelming, not just financially but emotionally, as I felt responsible for justifying their investment in my education and proving that their sacrifices had been worthwhile. The starting salary at Davidson Marketing was $42,000, which seemed like a fortune compared to what my parents earned, and I genuinely enjoyed the actual marketing work we accomplished during regular business hours. Our diverse team handled campaigns for local restaurants throughout Chicagoland, small retail chains expanding across the Midwest, and innovative startup companies developing everything from mobile apps to sustainable consumer products. The creative aspect of developing comprehensive marketing strategies energized me more than anything I had experienced in previous jobs. working with clients to understand their target demographics, analyzing market research data, and crafting compelling brand narratives that resonated with consumers felt like the perfect combination of analytical thinking and creative expression. I was naturally good at identifying unique selling propositions and translating complex business concepts into accessible marketing messages that drove customer engagement and increased sales revenue. Several clients specifically requested to work with me on their campaigns, and my conversion rates consistently exceeded company averages across all major performance metrics. The fundamental problem was that Sarah seemed to believe that paying us for 40 hours per week meant she legally owned us for 60 or 70 hours, treating salary employees like indentured servants rather than professionals with rights and boundaries. She would schedule client meetings on Saturday mornings at 9, then act genuinely surprised and offended when employees asked about weekend compensation or questioned the necessity of weekend work sessions. Her favorite manipulative phrase was asking us to be team players, as if wanting to be paid for our time was somehow selfish, unprofessional, or indicative of a poor work ethic that would limit our career advancement opportunities. She had systematically created this toxic culture where questioning her unreasonable demands was seen as lacking ambition, dedication, or the entrepreneurial mindset necessary for success in the modern business world. My colleague Jennifer Martinez had been working at Davidson Marketing for 2 years and had completely bought into Sarah's psychological manipulation and exploitative business model. She would actually volunteer for unpaid weekend work, staying late without compensation, and seemed genuinely confused when other employees expressed frustration about the illegal expectations and unethical treatment. Jennifer would make passive-aggressive comments about how truly successful people understood that building careers required personal sacrifices and going above and beyond basic job requirements, completely missing the fundamental point that we were talking about legal compensation for our time and labor, not avoiding hard work or shirking professional responsibilities. She had internalized Sarah's propaganda so thoroughly that she believed working for free demonstrated superior commitment and professional dedication. The breaking point came on a particularly brutal February morning when temperatures had dropped to -15 degrees, and the wind chill made walking outside feel like physical torture. Sarah called an emergency weekend meeting to discuss what she described as a critical client crisis that threatened one of our most important accounts. One of our restaurant clients, a popular deep dish pizza chain with locations throughout the Chicago suburbs, was unhappy with their social media campaign performance and threatening to terminate their contract unless we immediately developed a completely new marketing strategy. Sarah decided that the entire team needed to spend both Saturday and Sunday developing comprehensive solutions, including new social media content, revised advertising campaigns, and detailed competitive analysis reports. When she announced this mandatory weekend work session on Friday afternoon, I finally reached my absolute limit with her illegal and exploitative demands. I had made plans to drive back to Indiana that weekend to visit my parents, who I hadn't seen in over a month due to work demands and the challenging winter weather conditions. More importantly, I was tired of being expected to work for free and watching Sarah profit from our unpaid labor while treating us like we should be grateful for the opportunity to be exploited. The hypocrisy was infuriating, as Sarah drove a luxury BMW and lived in an expensive Gold Coast condo while paying employees below market salaries and demanding unpaid overtime that violated basic labor law protections. I approached Sarah after the meeting and politely but firmly explained that I wouldn't be able to attend the weekend sessions unless the company provided proper overtime compensation as required by both Illinois state law and Federal Fair Labor Standards Act regulations. I had spent considerable time researching employment law requirements, consulting with online resources, and speaking with friends who worked in human resources departments at other companies. I knew that non-exempt employees were legally entitled to time-and-a-half pay for any hours worked beyond 40 per week, and that employers could not circumvent these requirements by calling overtime work voluntary or professional development. Sarah's reaction was swift, vindictive, and revealed the true nature of her character beneath the professional facade she maintained for clients and business partners. She told me that my attitude was becoming a serious problem for team morale, and that successful employees didn't nickel and dime the company over every hour worked or try to profit from normal business operations. According to Sarah, questioning unpaid overtime demands demonstrated a lack of professional maturity and commitment to excellence that would ultimately limit my career advancement opportunities within the organization. She made it clear that employees who couldn't embrace the company culture of going above and beyond would find themselves excluded from important projects and advancement opportunities. The threat was obvious and immediate, designed to intimidate me into compliance with illegal demands. The following Monday morning, Sarah called me into her corner office with its panoramic views of downtown Chicago and Lake Michigan, but the beautiful scenery couldn't disguise the hostile atmosphere that had developed between us. She presented me with a formal written warning about what she described as my increasingly negative attitude and lack of team cooperation that was affecting workplace morale and productivity. The document claimed that my refusal to attend weekend meetings demonstrated poor judgment, unprofessional behavior, and a fundamental misunderstanding of workplace expectations in the competitive marketing industry. Sarah insisted that successful employees understood the need for flexibility and commitment beyond basic job requirements, and that my resistance to company culture raised serious concerns about my long-term fit within the organization. The warning went into my personnel file, and she made it abundantly clear that any future attitude problems or resistance to company policies would result in immediate termination and potentially negative references that could damage my career prospects throughout the Chicago marketing community. I signed the document because I desperately needed the job and couldn't afford to be unemployed during the harsh Chicago winter. But I also started meticulously documenting every interaction and keeping detailed records of all unpaid overtime expectations, illegal demands, and retaliatory behavior. I created a comprehensive file with printed emails, handwritten notes about verbal conversations, and time-stamped records of all weekend work sessions and unpaid hours that Sarah had demanded from employees. The documentation process became a form of psychological protection, giving me some sense of control in an increasingly hostile work environment where I felt powerless and vulnerable to arbitrary retaliation. Over the next month, Sarah systematically began reducing my responsibilities and excluding me from important projects and client meetings that I had previously handled successfully. She would schedule team meetings without inviting me, then act confused and slightly annoyed when I mentioned missing critical information about ongoing campaigns and client communications. My assigned workload decreased significantly, but my scheduled hours remained the same, creating this bizarre and psychologically torturous situation where I was being punished with boredom and professional isolation rather than overwhelming work demands. The message was clear: comply with illegal overtime demands or face professional marginalization and career stagnation. The most infuriating and psychologically damaging part of this retaliation was how Sarah would make passive-aggressive comments about work ethic and commitment during team meetings, always careful to avoid naming me directly but ensuring that everyone understood exactly who she was targeting. During weekly staff meetings, she would effusively praise Jennifer and other compliant colleagues for their dedication, commitment, and willingness to go above and beyond for client success, while pointedly mentioning that some people seemed to have different priorities and weren't fully invested in the company's mission and values. These public humiliations were designed to isolate me from my coworkers and create social pressure to conform to illegal demands. The psychological manipulation extended beyond just work responsibilities to social dynamics within the office. Sarah would organize team lunches and informal gatherings without including me, then make references to these events during meetings where I was present, reinforcing my status as an outsider who didn't belong with the committed team members. She encouraged other employees to view me as a troublemaker who was disrupting workplace harmony and potentially threatening everyone's job security by questioning established practices and company culture. In March, when Chicago was finally beginning to show signs of spring with temperatures rising above freezing and patches of dirty snow melting on downtown sidewalks, Sarah delivered what she clearly intended as the final blow to force my resignation. She called me into her office and announced that my position was being restructured due to budget constraints and changing client needs, reducing my status from full-time to part-time with only 25 hours per week. The reduction meant losing my health insurance benefits, taking a devastating pay cut that would make it impossible to afford my rent and student loan payments, and facing the humiliation of being publicly demoted in front of colleagues who had previously respected my professional abilities. Sarah presented this change as temporary, suggesting that my hours might be restored if my attitude improved and I demonstrated renewed commitment to company values and team cooperation. The cruel irony was that despite having my hours cut nearly in half, I was still expected to complete the same amount of work and maintain the same level of client service that had previously required full-time commitment. Sarah made it clear that this was a test of my efficiency and dedication, implying that truly committed employees would find ways to accomplish more work in less time without compromising quality or client satisfaction. The impossible expectations were designed to either force my resignation or provide justification for termination based on alleged performance failures. That night, I sat in my small studio apartment near Wicker Park, looking out at the snow-covered streets lined with bare trees and feeling completely defeated by the systematic campaign of retaliation and psychological warfare. The neighborhood, usually vibrant with young professionals and college students, seemed gray and depressing under the harsh streetlights illuminating patches of dirty snow and ice. The financial stress was overwhelming, as my reduced paycheck wouldn't cover basic living expenses, let alone student loans and the credit card debt I had accumulated during periods of unpaid overtime work. I was genuinely considering abandoning my marketing career dreams and returning to Indiana to work at the same factory where my parents had sacrificed so much to give me better opportunities. But something about the fundamental injustice of the situation made me angry enough to fight back instead of just walking away and accepting defeat. The thought of Sarah continuing to exploit other employees, knowing that her illegal practices had driven me away through intimidation and retaliation, was intolerable. I realized that backing down would not only devastate my own career prospects but would also enable continued abuse of current and future employees who might not have the resources or knowledge to protect themselves from similar treatment. I started researching employment lawyers throughout Chicago, reading online reviews and consulting with legal aid organizations that provided information about worker rights and protection against employer retaliation. The consultation process was intimidating at first, as I had never dealt with legal issues more complex than traffic tickets. But attorney Michael Rodriguez at Rodriguez Employment Law immediately understood the seriousness of my situation and the strength of the evidence I had gathered. His office in the Loop was modest but professional, and Michael took over an hour during our initial consultation to review my documentation and explain the legal protections that Sarah had violated through her retaliatory behavior and wage theft practices. Michael explained that employers cannot legally retaliate against employees for asserting their right to legal compensation for overtime work, and that Sarah's pattern of behavior constituted clear violations of both Illinois state employment law and federal Fair Labor Standards Act protections. The documented timeline of events, starting with my request for overtime pay and followed immediately by disciplinary action and hour reduction, created what lawyers call a prima facie case of illegal retaliation that would be difficult for any employer to defend successfully in court. More importantly, Michael helped me understand that my case was significantly stronger than I had initially realized during those dark nights of self-doubt and financial anxiety. The combination of documented unpaid overtime expectations, written disciplinary action for asserting legal rights, and subsequent reduction in hours created a compelling narrative of systematic employer retaliation that violated multiple federal and state employment protection statutes. The evidence was not just anecdotal or based on my personal interpretation of events, but consisted of concrete documentation including emails, personnel records, and witness testimony from other employees who had observed Sarah's illegal practices and retaliatory behavior. We spent several weeks gathering additional evidence and building the strongest possible case for litigation. Michael's paralegal team helped me organize my documentation into chronological order and identify key pieces of evidence that would be most persuasive to judges and juries. The process included reaching out to former Davidson marketing employees who had left the company due to similar issues with unpaid overtime and workplace retaliation, many of whom were eager to provide testimony about their experiences with Sarah's illegal employment practices. The discovery process, which began in late spring as Chicago was finally warming up and Lake Michigan was losing its winter ice, revealed that Sarah's labor violations were far more extensive and systematic than anyone had initially realized. Through subpoenas and document requests, we uncovered email communications showing that Sarah regularly instructed managers to schedule mandatory weekend work without overtime compensation, treating wage theft as a normal business practice rather than a serious legal violation. Other current and former employees came forward with similar stories of unpaid overtime, denied meal breaks, and systematic retaliation against anyone who questioned company policies or asserted basic workplace rights. Jennifer Martinez, who had initially seemed like Sarah's most loyal supporter and had internalized the company's exploitative culture, provided some of the most damaging testimony when she was deposed under oath by my attorney's team. During questioning, Jennifer admitted that she had worked hundreds of unpaid hours over her 2 years with the company, including entire weekends and late evening work sessions that she had convinced herself were normal requirements for career advancement in the competitive marketing industry. Her testimony revealed the psychological manipulation that Sarah used to convince employees that unpaid overtime was actually professional development rather than illegal wage theft that violated federal labor standards. The mathematical calculation of unpaid wages was staggering when properly documented and analyzed by employment law experts. Jennifer alone had worked an estimated 400 unpaid overtime hours during her tenure, representing over $15,000 in stolen wages at the legally required time-and-a-half rate. Multiplied across multiple employees over several years, Sarah's systematic wage theft had saved Davidson Marketing Solutions hundreds of thousands of dollars through illegal practices that violated the basic employment protections that form the foundation of American labor law. Sarah's initial response to the lawsuit was predictably arrogant, dismissive, and demonstrated her complete lack of understanding about the seriousness of federal employment law violations. Her expensive corporate lawyer, whose hourly rate probably exceeded my monthly salary, filed motions claiming that weekend meetings were voluntary professional development opportunities rather than mandatory work sessions, and that my hour reduction was based on legitimate business concerns completely unrelated to any protected activity or legal complaints. They argued that I was simply a disgruntled employee trying to profit from normal business practices and workplace disagreements, painting my lawsuit as frivolous litigation that threatened the legitimate interests of small business owners throughout Chicago. However, the evidence was overwhelming and impossible to dismiss or explain away through legal technicalities and corporate doublespeak. Email records clearly showed Sarah explicitly requiring attendance at weekend meetings and threatening career consequences for employees who refused to participate in unpaid overtime work. The precise timing of my written disciplinary warning and subsequent hour reduction, occurring immediately after my request for legal overtime compensation, demonstrated textbook retaliation that violated multiple employment protection statutes designed to prevent exactly this type of employer abuse and intimidation. During Sarah's deposition, which took place in a sterile conference room in her attorney's downtown office, she made several statements that severely damaged her defense and revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of employment law requirements. She actually admitted under oath that she expected employees to work unpaid overtime as part of their professional development and career advancement opportunities, apparently not understanding that this admission constituted direct evidence of systematic wage theft that violated federal labor standards. When pressed by my attorney about the specific timing of my disciplinary action and hour reduction, Sarah claimed these decisions were based on legitimate performance concerns, but could not provide any documentation supporting these alleged performance problems or explain why my supposed performance issues had never been mentioned before I requested overtime compensation. The deposition transcript revealed Sarah's true attitude toward employee rights and legal workplace protections. She repeatedly expressed frustration that employees would prioritize legal compensation over company loyalty, describing wage and hour laws as government interference with her ability to run her business according to her own standards and expectations. Her testimony demonstrated a pattern of viewing employees as essentially property whose time and labor could be controlled without regard to legal boundaries or basic workplace fairness. The settlement negotiations began in early fall, when Chicago's beautiful autumn weather provided a stark contrast to the tense legal proceedings that had dominated my life for months. Sarah's business insurance company was pushing hard for a quick resolution to avoid a public trial that would expose her illegal labor practices to media attention and potential criminal referrals to state and federal authorities responsible for prosecuting wage theft violations. The mediator, a retired federal judge with decades of experience in employment law cases, helped both sides understand the risks and potential outcomes of continued litigation that could drag on for years and cost everyone involved significant time and money. For Sarah, a public trial meant devastating exposure of her systematic illegal labor practices, potential criminal charges for wage theft that could result in personal liability and even prison time, and almost certain closure of her business due to reputation damage and financial penalties. The evidence was so overwhelming that her insurance company's lawyers privately acknowledged they had no realistic chance of winning at trial, making settlement negotiations their only viable option for limiting financial exposure and preventing complete business destruction. For me, a settlement meant guaranteed compensation without the uncertainty, stress, and additional years of litigation that could result from taking the case to trial. While the potential jury award might have been larger, the settlement provided immediate financial relief and the satisfaction of holding Sarah accountable for her illegal practices without the emotional toll of extended court proceedings and cross-examination by hostile corporate lawyers. The final settlement amount exceeded everything I had hoped for when this legal journey began during those dark winter nights in my Wicker Park apartment. The comprehensive agreement included full back pay for all unpaid overtime hours worked by myself and other affected employees, calculated at the legally required time-and-a-half rate that Sarah had illegally denied us for years. Punitive damages for the retaliation I experienced were substantial, reflecting the court's recognition that employer intimidation and illegal hour reductions cause serious harm that extends beyond just lost wages to include emotional distress, career damage, and violation of fundamental workplace rights. The settlement also included complete payment of attorney fees and legal costs, which had accumulated to tens of thousands of dollars over months of investigation, discovery, and litigation preparation. This provision was crucial because it meant that Sarah's illegal practices had cost her far more than simply paying legal overtime compensation would have in the first place, sending a clear message about the financial consequences of violating employment law protections. More importantly for long-term workplace justice, the settlement required Sarah to implement comprehensive labor law compliance training for all management personnel and establish proper timekeeping systems to prevent future violations of wage and hour requirements. An independent monitor would oversee Davidson Marketing's employment practices for 2 years, ensuring that other employees would not face the same illegal treatment and systematic exploitation that had characterized the company's operations under Sarah's leadership. The agreement also required Sarah to provide neutral employment references for all affected employees and included specific language prohibiting any further retaliation related to the lawsuit or my assertion of legal workplace rights. These provisions protected me and other employees from continued harassment or career sabotage, allowing us to move forward with our professional lives without fear of ongoing employer vindictiveness or reputation damage in Chicago's interconnected marketing community. On the day I received the settlement check, which arrived by certified mail on a crisp October morning when the leaves along Lake Michigan were displaying brilliant reds and golds, I drove through downtown Chicago thinking about how dramatically my life had changed over the past year. The financial compensation was life-changing, allowing me to pay off student loans, build an emergency savings account, and pursue career opportunities without the desperation and financial pressure that had made me vulnerable to workplace exploitation in the first place. But the real victory was standing up to systematic workplace bullying and illegal employment practices that had affected multiple employees and would have continued indefinitely without legal accountability and consequences. Sarah had created a toxic work environment where people were psychologically manipulated into accepting illegal treatment and afraid to assert their basic legal rights due to fear of retaliation and career sabotage. The lawsuit forced the accountability that protected current employees and sent a clear message throughout Chicago's business community that wage theft and employment retaliation carry serious legal and financial consequences that can destroy businesses and careers. I used a significant portion of the settlement money to complete an advanced digital marketing certification program at Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management, building expertise in areas like data analytics, marketing automation, and customer relationship management that would have been impossible to pursue while struggling with reduced hours and workplace retaliation. The program connected me with industry professionals and potential clients throughout the Chicago metropolitan area, creating networking opportunities that led directly to my decision to start my own consulting business rather than risk encountering another exploitative employer. Working for myself meant never again having to deal with employers who expected free labor, violated basic workplace rights, or retaliated against employees for asserting legal protections that form the foundation of American employment law. The freedom to set my own schedule, choose my clients, and build a business based on ethical practices and mutual respect was worth more than any salary or benefits package that traditional employment could offer. The entrepreneurial experience taught me valuable lessons about workplace advocacy, business ethics, and the importance of documenting problematic employer behavior that millions of American workers encounter but rarely challenge due to fear, ignorance, or lack of resources. My case demonstrated that individual employees can successfully challenge illegal employment practices when they have knowledge, documentation, and access to qualified legal representation. 6 months after the settlement, during one of Chicago's beautiful spring days when the city was coming alive after another brutal winter. I ran into Jennifer Martinez at a popular coffee shop in Lincoln Park near the lakefront. She had left Davidson Marketing Solutions and found a position with a progressive marketing agency that respected employee rights, provided fair compensation for all hours worked, and maintained a healthy work-life balance that didn't require systematic exploitation of staff members. She thanked me profusely for filing the lawsuit and admitted that she had been afraid to speak up about the unpaid overtime expectations for years, even though she knew deep down that Sarah's demands were illegal and fundamentally unfair. Jennifer explained that the lawsuit had opened her eyes to how much unpaid work she had been doing over the years, and how Sarah's psychological manipulation had made her feel guilty for wanting basic employment protections that are guaranteed by federal law. She estimated that she had worked over 300 unpaid hours during her 2 years at the company, representing thousands of dollars in stolen wages that she would never recover but had learned to recognize as illegal exploitation rather than normal career requirements. The conversation with Jennifer revealed the broader psychological damage that Sarah's illegal practices had inflicted on multiple employees who had internalized blame for workplace problems and convinced themselves that exploitation was normal. Many former employees had left the marketing industry entirely, believing that unpaid overtime and workplace harassment were unavoidable aspects of professional careers rather than illegal practices that violated fundamental employment protections. The broader impact of the lawsuit extended far beyond just financial compensation for affected employees and created ripple effects throughout Chicago's marketing and business community. Several other employees who had left Davidson Marketing came forward with their own stories of wage theft, denied breaks, and systematic workplace retaliation, leading to additional investigations by the Illinois Department of Labor and potential criminal referrals to federal authorities responsible for prosecuting employment law violations. The Illinois Department of Labor opened a comprehensive investigation that resulted in additional penalties, required systemic changes to Davidson Marketing's employment practices, and ongoing monitoring to ensure compliance with state and federal workplace protection laws. The investigation revealed that Sarah's illegal practices extended beyond just unpaid overtime to include improper classification of employees, denial of legally required breaks, and systematic intimidation of workers who attempted to assert basic workplace rights. Sarah herself seemed to disappear from Chicago's marketing scene following the settlement and subsequent investigations that exposed the full extent of her illegal business practices. Former clients reported difficulties reaching Davidson Marketing Solutions for ongoing campaign management and customer service, suggesting that the company was struggling to maintain operations under the weight of legal penalties and reputation damage. Several major clients terminated their contracts and pursued other marketing agencies that could provide reliable service without the legal complications and ethical concerns associated with working with employers who systematically violated labor laws. The ripple effects extended to other small businesses throughout Chicago as word spread about the serious legal and financial consequences of wage theft and employment retaliation. Several business organizations began offering compliance training programs to help employers understand their legal obligations and avoid the devastating penalties that had destroyed Davidson Marketing Solutions and ended Sarah's career in the marketing industry. Davidson Marketing Solutions eventually closed permanently, unable to recover from the legal costs, settlement payments, ongoing regulatory penalties, and reputation damage that resulted from years of systematic employment law violations. The closure provided vindication for all the employees who had suffered under Sarah's illegal practices and sent a clear message that businesses based on worker exploitation are ultimately unsustainable when faced with legal accountability and community consequences. Looking back on this transformative experience, I realize how many red flags I initially ignored because I was desperate for career advancement and financial stability after graduating college with substantial debt and limited work experience. Sarah's manipulation was sophisticated and carefully designed to make employees feel personally responsible for workplace problems while shifting blame away from her illegal practices and systematic exploitation of vulnerable workers seeking professional opportunities. She had created an environment where questioning unpaid overtime demands was framed as lacking commitment and professional dedication, rather than asserting basic legal rights that are protected by federal employment law. The psychological manipulation was so effective that even intelligent, educated employees like Jennifer had internalized blame for perfectly reasonable expectations about legal compensation and workplace fairness. The most important lesson I learned through this difficult but ultimately empowering experience was the critical value of thorough documentation and understanding basic employment law protections that every American worker possesses regardless of their position, industry, or employer's policies. Keeping detailed records of unpaid work expectations, retaliatory actions, and illegal demands provided the concrete evidence necessary to prove my case in court and hold Sarah accountable for systematic violations of federal labor standards. Understanding that employees have non-negotiable legal rights that cannot be waived through employer pressure, workplace culture, or economic necessity was crucial for recognizing when those rights were being systematically violated through illegal practices disguised as normal business operations. Knowledge truly is power when it comes to protecting yourself from workplace exploitation and employer retaliation. For anyone currently facing similar workplace situations involving unpaid overtime, employer retaliation, or systematic violation of basic employment rights, I want to emphasize that employers cannot legally punish employees for asserting their right to fair compensation and legal workplace protections. Unpaid overtime expectations, denied meal breaks, and hour reductions following protected activity are serious legal violations that can result in significant financial penalties for employers and substantial compensation for affected workers. Employment lawyers often work on contingency fee arrangements for wage theft and retaliation cases, meaning that legal representation is accessible even when workers have limited financial resources and cannot afford expensive hourly legal fees. Many attorneys who specialize in employment law are passionate advocates for worker rights and understand the power dynamics that make it difficult for individual employees to challenge illegal employer practices without professional legal support. The experience also taught me profound lessons about the importance of workplace advocacy and collective action in creating systemic change that benefits all workers rather than just individual complainants. When employees remain silent about illegal employment practices due to fear, ignorance, or economic desperation, employers continue exploiting workers without consequences and often expand their illegal practices to affect more people over longer periods of time. Speaking up about workplace violations and filing legal complaints creates accountability that protects everyone in the workplace, not just the individual taking action against employer retaliation and illegal practices. My lawsuit benefited current Davidson marketing employees, former employees who had suffered similar treatment, and future workers who would have faced continued exploitation if Sarah's illegal practices had remained unchallenged and unpunished. My consulting business has grown steadily and successfully over the past 2 years, allowing me to work with small businesses throughout the Midwest to develop ethical marketing strategies that respect both employees and customers while building sustainable competitive advantages. The freedom and flexibility of being self-employed means setting my own schedule, choosing projects that align with my values, and never again dealing with employers who expect unpaid labor or create hostile work environments for employees who assert their basic legal rights and workplace protections. Every successful marketing campaign I complete and every satisfied client relationship I build reminds me that taking action against Sarah's illegal practices was absolutely the right decision, both for my personal career development and for the broader principle of workplace justice that protects all American workers from exploitation and retaliation. The lawsuit not only provided crucial financial compensation but also personal empowerment and professional opportunities that have fundamentally shaped my entire career trajectory and life philosophy. The settlement money allowed me to take entrepreneurial risks and pursue business goals that would have been completely impossible while struggling with reduced hours, workplace harassment, and the constant fear of retaliation that characterized my experience at Davidson Marketing Solutions. More importantly, the experience gave me unshakable confidence to advocate for fair treatment and legal compliance in all future professional relationships, whether as a business owner, consultant, or potential employee. Today, when I drive through downtown Chicago and pass the building where Davidson Marketing Solutions used to operate, I feel tremendous pride in the courage it took to challenge systematic illegal employment practices despite the risks of retaliation and career sabotage. The lawsuit sent a powerful message throughout Chicago's business community that workers have fundamental rights that cannot be violated without serious legal and financial consequences, regardless of employer manipulation, economic pressure, or workplace intimidation tactics. The case demonstrated the effectiveness of federal and state employment law protections when employees have the knowledge, documentation, and resources necessary to enforce their rights against employers who systematically violate labor standards. Sarah's attempts to frame unpaid overtime as professional development and retaliate against employees asserting legal rights ultimately resulted in business closure, substantial financial penalties, and permanent damage to her professional reputation throughout the marketing industry. For viewers who may be facing similar workplace challenges involving wage theft, unpaid overtime, or employer retaliation, please remember that documenting problematic employer behavior and consulting with qualified employment lawyers can provide legal options and protections that you might not realize exist under federal and state labor law. Illegal retaliation and systematic wage theft are serious violations that courts and regulatory agencies take very seriously, especially when supported by clear evidence, witness testimony, and proper legal representation. The most personally satisfying aspect of this entire legal journey was proving definitively that employees don't have to accept illegal treatment simply because they need their jobs or fear economic consequences from challenging employer misconduct. Workplace bullies and exploitative employers like Sarah count on employee fear, financial desperation, and ignorance about legal protections to continue their illegal practices without accountability or consequences. Legal action disrupts this pattern of exploitation and creates meaningful consequences for employers who systematically violate worker rights and federal employment protections. The financial penalties, regulatory oversight, and reputation damage that resulted from my lawsuit forced changes that protected other employees and sent clear warnings to businesses throughout Chicago about the serious risks of wage theft and employment retaliation. Standing up to illegal employment practices required significant courage, patience, and support from qualified legal professionals who understood both the law and the practical challenges facing individual workers seeking justice against powerful employers. However, the ultimate outcome exceeded every expectation I had when this legal journey began during those dark winter nights of financial stress and workplace harassment. The comprehensive settlement, personal empowerment, and career opportunities that resulted from taking legal action have fundamentally shaped my life in positive ways that continue to create benefits and opportunities years after the case concluded. The financial compensation provided immediate relief and long-term security, but the personal growth and professional confidence were equally valuable and have influenced every subsequent career and business decision. This story demonstrates that challenging workplace injustice, even when it feels overwhelming and risky, can lead to outcomes that benefit not just individual employees but entire workplaces, industries, and communities. Employment law exists specifically to protect workers from exploitation and retaliation, but these protections only have meaning when people have the courage, knowledge, and resources to enforce them against employers who systematically violate fundamental labor standards and workplace rights that form the foundation of American employment law.